Everyone has a dream, and some people's dreams take them to extraordinary places. David Simon is one of those people. Tune in every quarter to learn how a 50-something lawyer from the U.S. navigates the ancient world of Oxford College in pursuit of an MBA.
We take things in a little bit different direction today, as David Simon has completed his Oxford MBA degree, and we have 4 of his colleagues come on and talk about their experiences. We have Juan Velasco Kerguelen, Tariq Zufar, Joe Odowski, and Knox McIlvaine. It's a fascinating exploration of why people got this Oxford MBA, Executive MBA degree, what their experience was like, and how they hope to use it going forward. David sits in as co-host with me on this special episode. I know you'll enjoy it. Back with David Simon, but we're back with not simply David, but some of his fellow colleagues / students, ex-students, I should say, and people he went through Oxford Executive MBA program with. So, David, I'm going to turn it over to you and maybe set us up a little bit about what we're going to do today.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. And thanks, everybody, for joining us. So for anybody who's been listening to my podcast over the kind of 2-year Oxford EMBA journey, you've heard me talk a lot about how great my classmates are and how much I've learned from them and what a privilege that has been. And so I thought it would be great to sort of, as we sort of wrap up this experience, to have hear from a bunch of who are also lawyers who also went through a similar journey. And it was sort of surprising to me when I started how many lawyers there were in our class. And we don't have them all. We've got a WhatsApp group that's a little bit broader than this. But we got a great representation here today. And I'm going to just sort of give you the high level on each, very high level, and then let each, maybe Tom, it makes sense to just kind of go around the horn and let each person kind of just give a quick intro into who they are and what their practice is, and then we can dig into some substance. So I have my friend Joe, who's an American lawyer, my friend Tariq, who's a Pakistani lawyer, my friend Juan, who is a lawyer practicing in Colombia, and my friend Knox, who's sort of hard to categorize in many ways. He's a former American lawyer, former partner in a UK firm, and now moving into different territory. So maybe we'll start at the end. Knox, maybe you can go first and give a quick intro, and then we'll go around, and then Tom can pick our brains on why we did this and what we got out of it.
Sure. So the high level spec of my career is I was a partner at Allen & Overy in London in the financial services regulatory practice, mostly advising global banks and asset managers and some governments on issues related to systemic risk and bank safety and soundness and derivatives and structured finance, sort of wide variety of stuff. A lot of it was driven, though, by the global financial crisis and the regulatory response to it. Before that, I was counsel at Cleary Gottlieb in both New York and London, where I started my, London and New York. I started my career in New York. And then, as David alluded to, before becoming a lawyer, I spent about a decade in tech in various roles, including as an entrepreneur and a coder and other things. So I took on the EMBA as a way of helping to transition back into more business-oriented roles. I'm happy to talk more about that.
You want to go next?
Sure. Thank you, David and Tom. So I'm a practicing lawyer in Colombia. I'm also a U.S. educated. I went to law school in the States as well. And I'm currently a partner with Baker McKenzie Colombia office, practicing mostly transactional tax, M&A tax. And in the recent years, I have been very involved in helping some family offices, single family offices and multifamily offices in wealth management structure. So I just entered the Executive MBA at Oxford with the whole idea of gaining some skills for being a better board member in the firm I'm partnered with. But I'm probably end up thinking about a totally different spectrum that we definitely going to share some ideas in this podcast.
All right, Tariq, why don't you go next?
Sure. So I'm currently a partner at Villani & Villani. It's one of the sort of larger leading law firms in Pakistan. My sort of focus is on the infrastructure and energy side with a bit of an M&A, but primarily my focus is on the energy, a bit more focus on the renewable side. Before that, I was a counsel in Pinson Mason, which is a UK law firm in Dubai. My journey towards Dubai is a bit more complicated in the sense that I think there were sort of a multiple. I think one was to sort of try to understand more of the business side because firms in Pakistan are sort of lacking that, and they don't really operate as a business. And I think that was something that I wanted to sort of think about, focus on. And I think the other thing that I sort of wanted to do was to business side myself as well. I think energy and climate change, these are things that interest me, and I wanted to see what else can I do other than the law practice itself. So these were the two broad motivations behind exploring and going for the AMBA.
And I think Joe is having some technical difficulties, Tom. So maybe we can just move into some questions, and when Joe gets them sorted, we can revert back. But you've got some incredible talent here, so go ahead and start picking their brains.
So I've had the chance to visit with David, and we've had a great conversation over the last couple of years. And I was thinking back over our podcast, and really started with, at the beginning, which was why. And then his first podcast, it was, what was it like? And it was interesting in the why podcast because actually there was a fair amount of fear. He hadn't been in academia in a long, long time. And I assume you guys haven't either. So what was it really like to have to go back to not just an academic environment, but an incredibly rigorous academic environment with a group of colleagues who are literally at their, top of their professions across the globe? What was sort of all of that experience like to step back into that atmosphere? I'm going to start with you.
Tom, for putting me on the spot. Incredibly difficult. And for me, I was managing a whole practice. Sort of a general difficult time which Pakistan is generally going through. So there was a lot of pressure on the work side. There was considerable pressure on the family side as well. And so my wife up a lot and was one of the able to actually do that because she was able to sort of absorb a lot of responsibilities as such. I wouldn't be able to do that. And the firm itself, they created that space for me to do that. So if these adjustments had not happened, I would not have been able to do the AMBA program that easily. So yes, it was incredibly difficult, but the only reason I was able to do was the support of the family and was the support of the firm.
What was it like for you to step back into an academic environment? All of us obviously have multiple degrees, and we have experienced that at some point in our lives. But I was really intrigued with David's journey in that part, or that part of his journey. What was that part of your journey like?
Yeah, I found it really exhilarating, invigorating. I really liked that. I like a challenge. It very much, Tariq is spot on. Like it takes a lot to do this. It's a very intense program. It's lots of new material, new ways of thinking about stuff that you're familiar with already, perhaps, and then learning entirely new things. But that's also part of why I was there, because I wanted to, stretch the muscle, get the brain doing different things, and was really invigorated by that. I found some of it to be challenging. I think as lawyers, a lot of what we do is learn, whether it's a case or a new law or whatever it might be. A lot of our job involves learning. And I was sort of reminded that academia is a very particular kind of learning, that it's learning to think like you're in store, or to, give them what they're looking for, and they're not often clear on what they're looking for. So I found that there is sometimes a disconnect between my my grade and how much I learned in a class. And that some of the places where I learned the most, I actually performed, I got like some of my lowest grades on, which was very interesting. I think, and I was trying to figure that out, whether that's because those were areas where I was trying to push myself into areas to apply what I'd learned more, or whether it was the sort of recontextualizing things so that they fit in my own brain, may not have aligned what I was writing with what the instructors were looking for. But there was an interesting kind of pattern there, which I noted.
Yeah, that's interesting, Max, because like I was actually just thinking about the same thing. Because Tom, you've heard us talk before. I mean, Oxford is this total black box, right? Where your project goes off into the Oxford ether, and a number comes back, and that's all that comes back. So none of us have gotten any feedback on anything we've done or learned other than a single number. It's sort of a little bit like your distribution as a partner in a law firm, right? It's like the one number at the end that tells you all you're supposed to know. But it was interesting because I look back and I had sort of the opposite conclusion. I was just looking at my marks. And I'm like, interestingly, like my highest marks were the ones that I was most engaged in and most like I cared most about. So I found the kind of the inverse relationship, but interesting observation on your part.
Going to get to you in just a minute, but Juan, I want to ask you, one of the other observations I heard from David was he continually just raved about you guys, his colleagues, and not simply just intellectual level, but the conversations you had, the different ways of looking at things. We American lawyers tend to look at things an American lawyer way, many different ideas and voices from literally around the world. What was that experience like for you?
In simple terms, Tom, I would say it was a remarkable experience. Like you had this holistic approach, fully understand multiple perspectives from all over the world, and that voice has definitely changed, and I think it's still changing my perspective of the way I look things currently. Not only from my legal practice in better understand my clients and their needs and what they're really looking forward to understand in their business or doing with a legal structure or whatever might be the case, but also to better understand the world. So I think if I can say something regarding my Oxford experiences, it's my fellow friends and colleagues from the program. Their perspective was just remarkable for me. And challenging myself, saying that in a very dogmatic way, you sometimes say, this is the way you have to do things. And then you listen a totally different perspective from a totally different part of the world, saying that, no, probably it's the other way around. And you change your mind and have a broader perspective. I love that part of the program, definitely.
First of all, welcome back. And maybe we could start with you telling us a little bit about your current practice and then why you chose to enter the program and how you were able to balance work-life frame.
Well, first, can you guys hear me okay? Because I'm having some technical difficulty.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I have a fairly diverse practice. Started out with a large law firm in Atlanta, moved to the South, started a small little boutique firm, and it's truly a small town practice. So for me, embracing the Oxford experience had to do with my own desire to broaden my network, and also I had a desire to get involved with more human rights work, but I knew not what I was getting myself into, because it was in many ways an overwhelming process of trying to mix full-time law practice with what was supposed to be a part-time MBA master's experience, but for some of us it felt like full-time work. But just touching on something that Juan said, the diversity of opinions and cultures and people was so amazing. But what I found so amazing is the sameness. that even in the middle of such diversity, 68 people from 42 countries and 20 some odd languages, that there was remarkable sameness and an acceptance of love and kindness and a desire to have an impact on the world that I suspected might exist, but I tell you, in so many ways, it changed me. It broadened my perspective, and the coursework I think that has and will help me add some tools to my tool belt. But the engagement with them across the world was just amazing in so many ways.
I'd like to turn to and ask if this is even possible for you to give one highlight from your time. And once again, my experience in visiting with David, every episode he had new highlights. So I'm not sure there is one highlight, but if given our group, if you could limit it, it doesn't even have to be the top highlight, but one of the top highlights. And I will tell you, for me, the highlight was listening to David. So this podcast journey for me has allowed me to experience a little bit of what he experienced. And I should probably tell you, this podcast series inspired another colleague to go to the Cambridge Executive MBA program simply by listening to David. So that's how powerful this podcast series has been for our listeners. So with that introduction, we'll start go backwards. Juan, what was one of the top highlights for you?
I would love to say that something in Oxford, but for me, the Brazilian trip was amazing. So being a Latin American, I found very different the Brazilian culture with the Colombian culture. So the Spaniard descendants from this side of the continent with the Portuguese descendant from the other side of the continent, totally different world, totally different experience. So I felt like a real foreigner standing in another country. And living that with my American fellows, with my Europeans, with my African friends and the Asian friends was like amazing, because I was like, okay, I feel like a real foreigner and I'm in my neighborhood. And was really incredible that all my fellow classmates always ask me, yeah, but this is Latin America, right? It's all the same. And it's not all the same. Brazil is a totally different animal. So it was a fantastic experience, not only for me, but also to prove my classmates that Latin America is a totally different, diverse continent in which each country has their own peculiarities and understanding of the world. So that was a really remarkable experience.
First thing that jumped to my mind, and I'm going to have to respond in that way, was just this sort of overwhelming sense of the time after class, like going to the pub. I just have all of these vivid memories of just spending hours chatting with people in the bar of one of the hotels that people used to stay at right in the middle of town, or some of these ancient taverns that we'd go to, and just talking with people from around the world about what we'd learned about current events, about our lives, and just the two sides to that. One is just how how much I grew intellectually as a person, getting contact with other cultures and other ways of thinking about the world, and other industries, but then also the deep personal growth of forming deep friendships, particularly later in life. I think it's pretty unique. It's hard to do. And I've genuinely come out of this process with, a dozen or so very close friends. And they're not ones who I have a lot of overlap in my life with other than Oxford. So, getting to spend time, with a Dutch aerodynamicist from Ferrari, or a South African fintech pioneer, or people from Australia and Hong Kong, and it's just been extraordinary. That time really, that's what stands out for me and resonates the most.
How about you?
Echo Knox's comments. I can think of lots of conversations that happened after hours, learned about people and culture and different ideas. But one of the things that I thought was pretty cool was that we had some international trips sponsored by the school, but we also had a couple that were curated by classmates. And one of our classmates, Saif, invited us to the UAE, to Dubai, and hosted us there. And he arranged an amazing array of visits with government leaders and business leaders. But one night we had a desert dinner, and we were able to meet with the Minister of Defense, and we sat in sort of a U-shaped, no holds barred discussion about anything and everything. And he invited us to ask the tough questions politically, socially, and it was amazing to sit under the stars with this former political leader, and then have a discussion to humanize the geopolitics. And so, and I was able to sit next to him at dinner for a brief period of time, and just humanize the whole exchange. So it was pretty amazing.
Tariq?
I'll sort of echo what Knox has said. I think it's a bit difficult at this stage of life to sort of form new friends. In some ways, you sort of live in your own silos, and I think Oxford allowed us to do that. I think the sort of highlight for me was we did a trip to Vietnam for a course called Business in Emerging Markets. I think for me what was interesting was that from all metrics, Vietnam and Pakistan were very similar in 2000. And then you see the divergence in journey where Vietnam did a phenomenal job. They really, really invested in themselves and developed themselves. And Pakistan sort of faced its own sets of difficulties. And that journey that Vietnam had interested me profoundly. And it was interesting to see how they had sort of achieved what they had achieved, which was not an easy thing to do. That was particularly interesting for me.
Off the hook on this one, David, because I don't think I've asked you for your highlight because you've given me so many, but I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you to pick one.
It's like picking my favorite kid. Not that easy. Not easy at all. So I loved all those stories and all those examples, and all resonated with me. I'm super jealous, Joe, that I didn't make it to the UAE trip because it sounds amazing. And I think the friendship point is so important. And one of the things that I sort of wanted to impart to my kid, part of the reason I did this is to sort of think about what am I teaching my kids? And part of that is, pushing yourself, stretching yourself, and making friends and continuing to make friends throughout your life. It's not something you just do when you're in college and then stop. And I think one of the things, and this may be silly, but one of the things that sort of stands out for me that sort of combines both of those two is the rowing. I mean, Tom, we've talked about this a couple of times, but our class, we're pretty committed to doing at least one rowing outing when we were in Oxford, every module. And I think it was super cool because I think it's very metaphorical in a sense, right? I think it represents a lot of these sort of more esoteric concepts we're talking about. It was doing something that we weren't good at, that we didn't know how to, like almost none of us knew anything about rowing. It required us to work together. It was social. I mean, it was super social. It was a way to really bond with people. And, we weren't good at it, but we ultimately, by the end of the term, our boats usually made their way up and down the river without incident. And to me, that was like in a lot of ways, sort of an embodiment of all of the like great things about the program, combined with the sort of the magic of Oxford and being in that place as well.
I'm going to ask you guys to maybe look forward a little bit and inquire about how you hope to use your experience, your degree, and everything you've developed through the Oxford experience going forward. And once again, I've had the chance to visit with David on some of his ideas, and they were incredibly exciting. So for me, this question is probably the one I'm looking the most forward to because of the diversity of people we have here. Everyone's going to have their own views on how they can use it. And Tariq, I was really interested in your background, climate change, urban development, water. I live in rural West Texas, so we talk about water every day. It's as universal as it could be. So I was really interested in how you hope to use everything you've learned that we've talked about in the podcast. And then we'll go Joe after Tariq.
One of the biggest challenges that Pakistan is going to face and has started already facing is climate change. There was a major flood last year, which sort of covered almost half of a province. And it was not a flooding that is usually a flooding by rivers. It was a rainfall flooding. Never happened before in Pakistan in that particular way. We also have a major sort of a dollar crisis that is happening because when you import fuel, you have to pay it in dollars. These sort of things sort of interest me because I believe that there has to be a solution that sort of focuses on works from an economic perspective, but overall also works from a climate perspective as well. We need to sort of reduce our utilization of fossil fuels, move towards more renewable. We have a large population that doesn't have access to electricity, and we have even a larger population that has access to electricity, but it is far more expensive than they can afford. And so the sort of idea that I've been working on is to come up with mechanics whereby they will have access to cheaper electricity. And we're sort of working with a few contractors, suppliers to sort of come up with products that would allow them to do so. What is a big problem in Pakistan? One is from a drinking water perspective. We don't have good drinking water. The other one is from an agriculture perspective. A lot of water is being wasted by bad agriculture and irrigation practices. The idea is to sort of help out the government into trying to optimize that utilization, which will not only increase in the acreage of farmland, but that will increase in the amount of agricultural output, which could be one of the biggest engines of economic growth. And so we're working on a few things on that as well. I think on the drinking water side, there are already models in India that have been working on that. You've got what they call water ATMs. So if you're able to sort of implement something like that, sort of working closely with villages, you can provide access to cheaper power and cleaner water, and that is essential. And I think the EMBA had sort of made me to start think about that. That these are opportunities, these are the ways you can potentially structure a certain services which can be sustainable as well as not that pricey. And so these are the things that I'm sort of thinking about, focusing on, talking to people, and hopefully launch something regarding that.
I really wanted to pose this question to you because I'm very much intrigued about the nature of your practice and incorporating everything we've talked about into, frankly, a small town practice. And how are you able to use what you've learned to not simply grow your business, but perhaps go in a different direction? And I'll leave it to you.
Welcome to the imposter syndrome and walking into an Oxford class for the first time and wondering, what the heck am I doing here? With the likes of these four guys and 64 other people. And then it was interesting after a couple of modules when we got our first grades back, how there was an immediate sigh of relief, palpable around the room that, okay, everyone there felt like, okay, maybe we do belong to some extent. So I started my Oxford journey with thinking that I wanted to do more human rights work. I'd been involved in a campaign in the Middle East. I had a client interested in that space and wanted to do something about it, and he approached me about helping. I was fine to help put together a team, but I told my client that I had no experience in that area, but I could put together a pretty good team. But in the process, over several years period, was really frustrated with the lack of coordination, with how little the needle moves with a lot of effort, how different NGOs and politicians and companies who are interested in that space for different reasons fail to properly coordinate. So I imagined that I could help and do a better job than they were at coordinating activities. And literally one day, I don't know how many years, 3 years ago, kind of Googled Oxford Impact and came up with an EMBA seems to make sense, because I did feel like if I wanted to be in that space and do more of that work, nonprofit work in the last phase of my career, that it would speed up the process of networking, which did happen, but also I needed a refresher in modern business practices, and so, but I will tell you that there was almost no time during the 2 years of EMBA to do anything other than my full-time law practice and doing all the work necessary. And I happen to be one of those students. My mates may laugh. I did read everything, and I did prepare outlines, and I wanted to capture everything so that I was able to recall it later on down the road if I needed to. Now, someone like Knox can read it one time and he gets it. But someone like me, I have to really organize my thoughts and have them in a format that I can pull about later. But it was interesting because while I had high aspirations of starting the process during EMBA, I found that I did not have time to focus on what's going to happen next. And what's interesting, in the last really week of our classes, one of our professors sort of encouraged us to embrace the fact that nothingness, meaning taking a break, is okay. That's part of the journey of capturing everything that you've learned and then imagining what it could look like going forward, but not to be afraid of pausing a bit, giving yourself some margin to figure it out. Now, having said that, I am involved with a nonprofit project in the education space in Africa, and I'm working on a legal tech project, both of which came out of my EMBA experience. And then as it relates to my law practice, it's so interesting because I have work that I'm getting now that I don't think I would have gotten except for having some sort of an Oxford pedigree. So the halo effect of the Oxford experience has already positively impacted my practice in ways that I didn't expect. And I suspect that will continue. But I do hope in the coming months that I'll be able to take a little bit of a break and then focus on some of these other projects, which were at the heart of my intention for coming to EMBA.
Knox, how about you?
So I entered the program very much in the career transition phase. I had a career in tech. I've had a career in law, and when I started working as a lawyer, I was aware. I knew that it wasn't going to be the last thing that I did, and it was a question of when I started to transition out of law into something else. And the EMBA was really a tool to facilitate that transition. I knew I wanted to do something more business oriented, to be on the field more as a player rather than an advisor. And I knew I wanted to sort of change the way that I interacted with other people, the nature of management, the nature of team. And so I had a sense more for what I'd like to do, what's next, rather than a specific thing in mind. So I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. And part of that process was, time with these wonderful people re-expanding my horizon. As a big law partner, I became deeply specialized in a very narrow esoteric part of law that was relevant to a fairly small type of client that I had to engage with on a very particular type of, fee structure or sort of project type. And it sort of narrowed my perspective of myself and of the world. And I think spending time both in the classroom and outside of the classroom with my colleagues sort of really broadened my personal horizons and professional horizons about what was possible and where I could fit. And I think that a big part of the program was helping to recontextualize me for the workplace. I think as Joe was talking about, there's a very nice credentialing that comes with Oxford on your resume, but also having MBA on your resume gives people a reason to look at me other than as just a financial services regulatory lawyer, and to maybe consider other ways of that I could add value. And so that's and it's paid off that way. So the nature of the conversations that I have right now are very much more dynamic. I'm not hearing, oh, we don't need a financial services regulatory lawyer when I'm doing networking or going for interviews. And I think it really is creating a wonderful path forward for me.
Hey, Tom, can I just note, I think we all were amazed by Knox's act of courage of just literally withdrawing from the partnership of a Magic Circle firm in an incredibly distinguished career, sort of mid-program, just knowing that he didn't want to do that and leaping into the unknown was pretty amazing to me. I admire you, Knox, for that a lot.
Thanks. And it was an interesting process because I as you said, I knew that it was like that part had come to a close. I had just a wonderfully fulfilling career, but it just became clear to me that was, it's time to draw a line under that and do something new. And I didn't know what was next. And I've had conversations about both the fear and the possibility of it with each of the people on this call and with others. And it's been, and I've really benefited from their support and from everyone's support. And something that was scary, but also right for me.
Took me till I was in my mid-50s. I always knew when the universe closed one door, another opened. But what I learned in my mid-50s was you have to have the courage to walk through. So kudos for walking through that door. Juan, how about you?
Prior to answering your question, I will also want to echo David's comment. It's very admirable what Knox has done so far. It's like when you enter into the legal profession and you enter into a law firm and you became a partner and you're starting to live in the dream according to the standards of a law firm, and certainly you have the courage to say, this is fantastic. I have done a fantastic career, but I think I have to move forward and move to another stage of my life. I think it's very admirable, Knox, and I have been very curious of your process because, of course, I'm not saying I'm quitting law right now. I really love practicing law. That's one of the main conclusions after the MBA. I really enjoy advising my clients and entering into projects and trying to help developing my country in a way of helping companies develop new jobs and new opportunities for people down here. But also the MBA gave me, from my perspective, this very lovely brand of Oxford in my resume, which is pretty remarkable how people identify this brand very easily and make a very easy correlation that this guy should know something because he went to Oxford. But a part of that superficial approach, I would say that I'm much more curious nowadays in building other aspects rather than law. And I'm trying to enter into ventures in a totally different way that I've done before. Much more curious about the business side or the social effect of these ventures rather than the legal approach. Because having practiced law for more than 2 decades and always thinking about legal problems and now thinking about, the legal problem is just one problem, not the only problem. It's something that I really value from this program.
I've had the chance to visit with you over the past several months on some of your thoughts about, if not a direction for your career, even a different way to deliver legal services. So I wanted to ask you, where you might see taking what you've learned and all of the experiences in Oxford. Is it around the delivery of legal services or perhaps a different direction?
So, like what I'm going to do when I grow up, we're going to save for a future podcast, so I have a little bit more time to figure it out because I don't have any answer right now. But in terms of like the legal services point, I mean, I think it's really interesting, and I guess I'd be interested to hear my colleagues' views on this. You know, I mean, we're a guild, right? And we've had a lot of success as a profession of, fighting off modernity for decades for sure. And one of the things that has really sort of struck me about our profession and the business of our profession particularly is just how unsophisticated we really are. I mean, it reminds me, sometimes I see this in with our clients in like a mergers and acquisitions context where you have a very successful, family-owned business that gets acquired by a super sophisticated, larger corporation, and you kind of see the people like, oh wow, like I didn't know we could do that. I didn't know there was technology that could accomplish that. I didn't know there were systems that could be applied. I mean, I feel that way sort of all the time when I think about the legal services industry and how we deliver services to our clients. There's so much more out there, and there's so much we could be bringing to make this to serve our clients better. And so that's been a big sort of eye opener for me. I think the other point, I just want to sort of follow on what Juan said, which is I think exactly right. Changing the way we think from just, our clients present us with a legal problem that we solve to being able to think more broadly about a legal problem as part of a broader business and strategic problem, and giving them, real solutions, systemic solutions to their problems, not just, a little corner of it. And I really think that, for me anyway, I think that's probably the biggest change in terms of the way I think about legal services.
I'd like to end by asking just your general final thoughts. I was going to ask something as mundane as would you recommend it for someone else, but I think I know the answer to that. So, Joe, I'm going to ask you to start, just sort of final thoughts, whatever they may be, on your entire experience.
I'm actually following up on something David was talking about, the law practice. It is a noble calling. And each of us, I know on this screen, and thankfully most of the men and women I've practiced law with, they view it that way. And they're noble people, that desiring to have high level of integrity and do great things and have an amazing impact on people and solve problems. One of the things that I've found that's so interesting, as hard as the work has been for me, it's remembering the value of continuously learning and growing. And within literally weeks of EMBA, what I was learning, I was already applying in my own business practices and for and in behalf of my own clients. It enhanced the level of service that I was providing to my client. And so we're not too old to keep learning. And I think as lawyers, particularly, you think of all the things we've learned about leadership, about negotiations, about valuation. I mean, there's so many aspects of the course materials that we probably, some of you, I know I have already applied in some ways to my law practice. So I am committed to continuing to learn. It's possible to continue to do that, but I'm definitely applying it, and it's relevant and it's been helpful. But the one last comment that I do want to make is, one who wants to go through this program, be mindful of the cost to everyone around you, your business partners. Well, let me say first, your family, your spouse, your children. There's so much that goes into a process like this, and I didn't do it perfectly. I know that, but I know that that's something to keep in mind. and throughout the process of the MBA is just continue to feed and nurture the relationships around you, your business partners, your family, your wife. So anyway, that was important to me. To scoot off, guys. Okay. Thanks.
All right, Joe, thank you so much. Juan?
I think one of the I'll say that entire program and the entire process was, like this, like ups and downs all the time. Especially for me, the jet lag, flying 10-hour flight every 6 weeks, and just the first 3 days a little bit jet lagged, but the process was amazing. At the end of the week, your head was about to explode with all the ideas, all the perspective, and all the things. And I would rather all my colleagues to and all the people that listen to this podcast to follow this program, especially in Oxford, not in Cambridge, but definitely that's something to do.
How about you?
So just with one of the things you said earlier in mind, that this has inspired people to think about whether they want to do an MBA for themselves. I think just an observation on where I got the most value from, and that was the interaction with the cohort. That was far and away where I grew the most professionally and personally, and just an extraordinary experience. Definitely valued the being part of this broader Oxford network. I think that's going to pay dividends over the years. And there was some valuable classroom, but I mean, to be honest, if we wanted to learn those, that academic material, there are ways that we could do that individually. So for anyone considering doing an MBA, I would really encourage them to think about it as an experience and as a way of developing relationships, and to pick the program on that basis. And the Oxford program stood out for me. There was two of them I was considering. One of them met on Fridays and Saturdays every other weekend. And that clearly is going to skew the cohort to be more local. And there will be less time for those things that I told you were so valuable and stood out to me, which is just spending time with other people unstructured after class, outside of class. And I picked the Oxford program because it was a week at a time at Oxford. And I knew that would mean lots of time with people to develop those friendships. And so I would encourage people to have that in mind, that cohort forming benefit really stood out. So to I think prioritize that if they're thinking about a program.
I'll definitely second what Knox has said. I think that the cohort itself is the sort of the biggest plus as far as Oxford is concerned. I'll sort of touch a bit about, I think the name Oxford, other than what it's there as far as your connections or CV or any conversation you have, it's important. But I think it gives you a certain amount of confidence as to actually implement any ideas that you may have. And I think that's where it's really helpful, in the sense that you can touch base with any member of your cohort and seek an advice. You will get good advice. You have access to a wider group of Oxford alumni that can become really helpful. I mean, I'll give you an example in Pakistan. We've got 2 Oxford graduates, ex-prime ministers. So it's an access thing. It's that thinking, that ability to sort of achieve what you want to achieve. I think you become a bit more ambitious in what your goals are. Even though you've achieved a lot, but you still feel that you can go much, much further. And I think that's what Oxford brings.
I'm going to ask you to play full Ed McMahon, kind of either answer that, wrap us up, but just take us home.
So I mean, Tom, for you and like anybody who's been listening to this and hearing me like rave about the quality of my classmates, I'm just going to end it with "I told you so." I mean, you guys have now just seen slice, just the private practice lawyer slice of the talent that we've all had the privilege to be around for 2 years. And so I think this last 50 minutes or so really highlights that. So I'm grateful to all my classmates, to you on the call, and to everybody else that are in different professions and added different perspectives. But thanks for joining us, and thanks for an amazing couple of years.